Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
And welcome to Artificially Ever After. For today's episode,
the most important conversation about AI.
Okay, hi everyone. That's a pretty big title.
Yeah, that is a big title. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you everyone. It's good to have you here. We do have a very important conversation today, as the title implies.
Yeah, we were debating what to put, but I think we both strongly believe that this actually is the most important conversation on AI. So.
We do, and I think doing the research for this episode, we both realised how aligned all the topics are with the kind of mission of Artificially Ever After and what motivated us to start this podcast in the first place, I think.
Yeah, exactly. This is almost at least half the reason we started the podcast,
yeah.
right?
So should we stop beating around the bush and get into what we're actually talking about? So we are going to be discussing the very big, very broad topic of ethics, and specifically AI ethics and kind of ethics of technology and data.
Which might sound like a bit of a boring topic, but it really does apply to everyone. And I think there are a lot of things that people don't know about that they wish they had before they started using AI technology.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we can all benefit and make the most out of AI by kind of thinking about these topics and getting involved in these discussions. And as we've seen, AI is becoming increasingly embedded into nearly all aspects of life. I think we can all agree on that. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Like, we've gone from just recommendation systems on social media and search engines, now Google Maps, however you're navigating, hiring for jobs even uses AI now. So whether you get your next job might be dependent on an AI system, fraud checks, loan and mortgage approvals. So nearly everywhere in society, there's some form of a kind of AI algorithm that's assisting humans with sort of decisions. And it's therefore absolutely essential that these AI systems that are now everywhere in society align with some core ethical principles that we set out and make sure that they're aligned with society's goals and what humans want these systems to actually do.
And I think Yuval Noah Harari, the author of Sapiens and many other really good books, puts it really nicely where all the technologies before AI, in some ways, were only amplifying what humans can do. Like, for example, he does make the pretty crazy comparisons like a nuclear bomb. Yes, that's crazy technology and obviously has huge implications. But at the end of the day, a human is going to press that button.
Yep.
The core difference with AI, it's the only technology that actually takes power away from humans and that it's making decisions instead of us. And I think that raises all of these ethical problems we'll talk about today.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Another thing that Yuval mentions, or the way he describes AI, or this new wave of generative AI, is some kind of alien life force that has sort of come to Earth. And I think that hints at the fact that even though these systems interact with us and output natural language now, if we're talking about chatbots, we can obviously read what they're writing to us. The way that they actually learn and kind of represent that data is not in any sort of way that we can interpret in a kind of true sense. So that's, I think, what they're hinting at with this kind of alien force. So one crucial point as well that I think we needed to mention here is that these tools that are being developed, whilst we're describing them as alien life forces and these kind of incredibly complex and powerful things, they are only as reliable as the data that they are trained on and that they've seen, which is human data for the most part. And also completely reliant on the people that build them. It's humans who create these things. I think that's one flaw in that analogy, is that they didn't just arrive at Earth, like we did build them and kind of develop them here on Earth. So yeah, I think this is a fundamental point that helps us address some of these ethical questions, is knowing where they come from and where some of the kind of problems lie. So I think one thing that just encapsulates what the message we're trying to say and motivate this episode is a recent statement from Gabriela Ramos, who's the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences of UNESCO. And she said that in no other field is the ethical compass more relevant than in artificial intelligence. These general purpose technologies are reshaping the way we work, interact, and live. And the world is set to change at a pace not seen since the development of the printing press 6 centuries ago. And AI technology brings major benefits in many areas, but without the ethical guardrails, it risks reproducing real-world biases and discrimination, fueling divisions and threatening fundamental human rights and freedoms. So yeah, that was a long quote there, but I think there's no way, I don't think either of us could have said that better ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that really motivates why we need to have this discussion now.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully that conveys why this might be the most important conversation about AI. But on top of that, there's another thing that happened recently, right?
There is, which is around this topic as well, maybe going back to Val's point of this kind of alien intelligence. But just last week, there was a call to ban the development of superintelligence. So these are AI systems that are smarter than humans, which is now on the kind of radar of some of these big tech companies, saying that it's a kind of ultimate goal for them to develop these systems. But basically a huge coalition of experts and leaders just signed this open letter from the Future of Life Institute. And I can actually read the whole thing because it's just 30 words. And it basically says that we call for a prohibition on the development of superintelligence not lifted before there is 1, broad scientific consensus that it will be done safely and controllably, and 2, strong public buy-in. And this has been signed by the 2 most cited living scientists, Nobel laureates, faith leaders, politicians, loads of AI researchers, founders, artists, actors I've seen as well. Former president of Ireland is on there as well. And over 25,000 other signatures who are growing in number. And I've actually signed it myself now since.
I was going to say, plus one more, right?
Plus one more. And yeah, I think, again, this is showing that there's something very scary looming on the horizon potentially. And unless we have public buy-in, which requires us to have these conversations in public and have widespread discourse around these topics, or scientific consensus, so we solve some of the technical problems that we're going to be discussing today, we should not continue developing AI in the way that we currently are. So yeah, now is the time.
I think these 2 points are pretty uncontroversial. Like, strong scientific consensus that will be done safely seems like something we can all want. And obviously strong public buy-in as well seems quite essential given how widespread this technology will be. So I think the perspective on this is actually that's a win-win. I think also for companies, if they're able to do these 2 things, then they will have an amazing piece of technology. So I hope a lot of companies don't look at this as like a way of stopping innovation.
No, I hope not. And just to chime in there again, sorry, I think we've both used this analogy in kind of workshops and presentations we've given previously, but just in a nutshell, to give you a sense on why superintelligence should be a really scary thing to you, when we give these talks, we put up an image on the slide of a tiger in a cage. And we make the argument that, the tiger is not in that cage because we are stronger than it or we would kind of, win in a fight against it, but it's because we are extremely intelligent beings and we've developed technology and tools to capture that tiger and keep it in the cage. So that just shows you, that we really should not underestimate intelligence, and building something that is smarter than us could result in us being in a cage potentially.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, the way we get there as well is really important. And I mean, in today's AI technologies, we see huge issues with privacy, biases, transparency. So I think that is where we want to base a lot of our discussion today is actually, of course, we have these huge risks of superintelligence, but fundamentally we have loads of problems to address
today
in today's society. And another really important point is, again, that these ethical considerations shouldn't be seen as ways of holding back innovation. Like fundamentally, this technology is meant to improve society. Like the goal isn't superintelligence. The goal is to improve our society. And part of that is obviously hearing the voices of those in it. So we should see AI development that maximizes benefits while minimizing harm. And I think it's really easy, especially in this AI hype cycle about superintelligence, to forget who the real stakeholders are, and that is kind of the general public. And to help us today with this pretty light-hearted topic, we're really lucky to have Dr Huw Day, and he's a co-organiser of Data Ethics Club, which he'll go on to explain about, but he's got loads of experience with the ethical landscape of data and in AI systems. So here's Huw to introduce himself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr Huw Day. I'm a research associate at the University of Bristol, doing sort of machine learning and digital health. And one thing that I've been involved with for the past couple of years is the Data Ethics Club. And so I've been attending that for a while, and also more recently been involved in helping run it. And so that's involved lots of different conversations about the ethics to do with data science and also AI. So it was set up in January 2021 by Dr. Nina Dekara and Dr. Natalie Zelenka, who are both friends of mine, and I started attending it a few months after that. And it's an online sort of journal club open to anyone that meets. Well, then it met fortnightly to discuss various topics to do with data science, data ethics, and AI, and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, we're very lucky to have Huw on today to help us with this discussion. And he's going to be coming in a bit later on into the second segment to help us understand some of the practical problems when it comes to building AI ethically, and looking at the ethics of the data it's trained on, and to share some of the insights that he's seen across many different conversations around AI ethics from different researchers and practitioners within all sorts of different domains. So yeah, that's going to be really cool to hear his insights. But yeah, speaking of which, do you want to run us through the plan today, Riku? What else are we going to be talking about?
Sure. So in segment 1, we're going to cover the core principles of ethical AI. So that's going to cover the what we're actually going to talk about. But in segment 2, we're going to talk about the practical challenges. So a lot of these things that we're aiming for, that we'll mention in segment 1, we'll actually find there are still really core technical issues with actually achieving. And then we'll have our fun fact, which I think will be very much needed. After that, we'll talk about governance and regulation. So we'll actually see what the world powers are actually doing about this kind of big threat that's kind of imposed on our society by tech companies. And then in segment 4, we'll talk about what we can actually do. So looking forwards towards more responsible and beneficial AI to actually wider society.
Yeah, and I think what still needs to be done, even given the current regulation, right?
Yeah, and importantly, what our lovely listeners can actually do to chip in on this crazy debate. So should we get to it?
Let's do it. Okie dokie, so let's get into it. We are now going to be discussing the core principles of an ethical AI system. And we've seen lots of these ethical frameworks springing up around the world from different governments and organizations, and they all kind of have their own flavor to this topic of ethics. But what we're going to focus on today are these commonalities across those different frameworks. And we're seeing several repeat themes which mainly focus on protecting human rights and broader societal well-being. So to help us with that, we are going to use UNESCO's global recommendation on the ethics of AI. And for those of you who don't know, UNESCO is, and I also didn't know this, I knew that the word UNESCO, but I didn't know what the acronym was, but UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And it's a branch of the UN that promotes international cooperation to build peace through education, science and culture. And it outlines 10 fundamental principles, including things like do no harm, safety, privacy, transparency. But yeah, we have basically largely based this episode around UNESCO's recommendations and looking at which themes come up across different governments' recommendations. So let's get into them. The first of which is fairness and non-discrimination. So this basically states that AI systems should treat individuals and groups equitably, avoiding the reinforcement of existing societal biases, which is easier said than done, as we know from how these systems are trained. We're going to get into that in the next segment, but just an example of how this could look. In 2019, there was a Nature report which found that 20% more men than women received a Facebook ad for STEM careers. So I think that's a perfect example where there's pretty clear existing societal biases towards having more men than women in STEM degrees and careers, which is shifting in recent years. But this is an algorithm which was trained on data which contain those biases, and it's just exacerbating them because it's then only showing these ads to more men than women. So it's enforcing that.
I mean, that makes sense because these systems are trained on data, and the data's from society. Yep. Societies change over time.
Exactly.
And therefore, the model's values that are learned from the data become outdated. Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly. Which also hints at why it's quite a tricky problem to solve, right? I mean, we've said so many times on this podcast that you almost can't eliminate all bias from the way that we're currently building AI systems, which is a data-driven approach. But what we see in these recommendations is that developers must strive to reduce and, if possible, eliminate bias in data to begin with, and then also the algorithms which they're being trained on.
And I guess that's a call to show that this conversation is one that is ongoing forever, because values inevitably change over time. So
exactly, yeah. And yeah, just to sum up on that point then of fairness and non-discrimination. So ultimately, the statements say that AI should promote social justice and inclusivity, ensuring its benefits are accessible to all. So, if we're going to develop these systems to benefit society, there's no point doing that if it's just benefiting small pockets of society, and it needs to be equitable.
Nice. On to transparency and explainability. And this is actually something that I think Kieren and I have done a little bit of research on ourselves on our PhD. And there's a few layers to transparency. And one of the core ones is actually looking at the AI system itself and understanding its decisions. So when, let's say you apply for a job and you maybe get accepted, maybe get rejected, if you ask why that happened, the black box model would not be able to tell you. It just gives you the output, which was just yes or no.
And just a bit of intuition there with that name, because I know throw it around a lot. Black box is just in the sense that it's black because we can't see in it there. It's almost like the black hole, like there's no light or information coming out of it. So once data goes in and information comes out, we don't know what's happening inside the box.
Yeah, exactly. So transparency means looking inside this black box, actually, turn it from black to clear. Although some people say white box.
Yeah, white box or grey box, yeah.
White isn't necessarily see-through, but maybe I'm being too physicsy about this. But anyway, so the idea here is actually, can the system that tells you your life-changing decision, can it actually explain why it changed your life in that way? So, and this is actually core to the previous point about biases, where a lot of the time when we look into the explanation of these decisions through transparency, we find that the model itself is massively biased. Yeah. So I know there's a famous case of Amazon when they first rolled out their CV screening, that they found that it was basically only men getting accepted, and they opened up this black box. They did some technical stuff that we'll go into later, and found that basically the easiest way to learn from past data was that generally men were hired in Amazon. So it's way simpler just to see if there's a woman, you just say no. Right. That's a way simpler pattern to learn than anything about their hobbies or
than all the complexities of their personality experience,
Yeah. But another really core part of transparency, which is often overlooked, is also like when AI is being used and not used. So this is almost transparency outside of the model and more into the system that you're interacting with in public. And we actually did an episode live, actually, Bristol City Hall.
We did,
called Hidden AI. And this is all about the how obvious is it that you're actually interacting with AI. So I think now, since the episode, it's more obvious that almost any website you go on now, there's like a chatbot in the bottom corner. You might think you're talking to a human, but really it's just a version of ChatGPT or these large language models. We really need more transparency in society where it just tells you this is an AI.
Yeah. And I think the explainability of the algorithms and the systems is a very difficult technical problem that even in research setting is very much unsolved. But I'd like to think that, if there are companies or websites that are using AI or generative AI to produce content, it's a much easier problem to just enforce or make sure that they're saying that content was from AI or there was some AI system in place there. So
yeah, explainability and also transparency can come in other forms, and we've done an episode again on this on open sourcing. So you do have companies like X who actually do open source their recommendation system algorithms. So they're in some ways they're kind of letting other people do the transparency, and but at the very least they're showing how their algorithm works. So there are many layers to this, but the core idea is that the user is actually aware of either the decision being made and that they're interacting with the AI at all. Yeah,
that's a really important one, isn't it? Next up is accountability and human oversight. And I think the main message here is that ultimately responsibility should remain with humans. Having an AI system making a decision should not be a way of us being able to wash our hands of that responsibility that comes with that decision being made. And the way this can work practically is that AI systems should be auditable, and developers or people deploying these systems must be accountable for their outcomes. And this is sometimes known as keeping a human in the loop. So, even if that system's working autonomously, there is a human there which is kind of ultimately responsible for the decision being made. And yeah, interestingly, we're starting to see now we're getting more autonomous AI systems that are working and making decisions on their own. Some policymakers are exploring certain mechanisms like having responsible officers for AI systems. So their kind of sole job is just to oversee the AI working on its own and then take responsibility for that final decision. And another one is a really interesting idea of requiring AI liability insurance or like compensation funds for victims of AI failures. So I thought that was a really cool one. It's hard to put responsibility, but people are still affected and suffering. There's a way for them to be compensated.
And I think the core place that we talk about accountability is actually in automated driving. So this has been part of like philosophical debates for like I want to say centuries actually, because you have the trolley problem. But
yes,
I think the core part in today's systems is that the responsibility is with the human, and that's what you were saying about the human in the loop.
Exactly.
But there are different grades to autonomous cars, and depending on the grade, actually the responsibility shifts from the human to the actual company that are giving you that autonomous car. So I guess you do have to kind of check the small print there.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's not as kind of binary or black and white as we'd probably like. But are any of these discussions today, to be fair?
Yes, there are lots of grey areas, aren't there?
So that's that one.
Cool. On to privacy and data protection. This is a huge one, and I'm going to try and keep this succinct. But as we know, I mean, AI is relying on so much information off the internet.
The whole of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of looking through the things I posted on Reddit when I was a kid, because I'm sure that's part of the training data. And that's exactly what privacy and data protection is all about. I mean, it's about respecting, maybe on a post that you wrote when you were younger and maybe more silly, you might have disclosed some personal information.
I'm going to start asking ChatGPT if I can dig up your old post. Now. I really want to know what you're referencing here.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really important that, I mean, so OpenAI, let's just say I did write something really personal. They never asked me whether I am happy for that to be put in the training data, right? They probably never even had a human read all of that stuff, right? So that's a huge problem with language models now is how do you actually train off these huge data sets and respect people's privacy? You can also see that you actually have to go on these large language model provider sites like ChatGPT and click toggle out of having your conversations being used for training. So if you haven't done that already, definitely go on settings and click opt out. It's not an opt-in mechanism. I mean, maybe more scarily, we actually are seeing some governments around the world actually deploying mass surveillance over their systems. So you can imagine social credit scoring. So all the CCTV cameras in your city might be tracking you, knowing everywhere you've gone, your train rides, everything you bought maybe. So this is also part of how you use these AI systems and how you don't really want to have them implemented where they're tracking all your moves. So that's privacy.
Exactly. Which, well, just a spoiler on that one, luckily there are some pretty strict regulations in place which prevent certain things like that, at least in the countries we're in. So, we'll come to that in the second half of the episode, but that's a very scary topic there, isn't it? The next one, I mean, it kind of might seem pretty obvious on face value, but it's safety and, quote, do no harm. So basically the AI should not pose undue risks of harm to people, which kind of follows off nicely what you were saying just there. But there are even more subtle examples of that, which I think are the ones that we are focusing on with these ethical conversations that might happen inadvertently. Because this can span physical safety, so autonomous vehicles or robots, but also psychological or social harm, which I think are very timely discussions at the moment with some of the things we're seeing with mainly younger people getting very attached to these chatbots. But one example that we've seen already actually was in 2025, just this year, was a Brown University study in the US that found that AI chatbots giving therapy advice often breached professional ethics. So, for example, mishandling users in crisis situations or reinforcing negative sentiments that they were expressing without any accountability as well. This is the main thing, that these were these kind of chatbots that there's no kind of real empathy or human interaction there. It's just a kind of algorithm. And it's often saying things, as we've seen in the study, that a human therapist would not kind of provide. So, that's a very real example there where there's obviously good intention with building that system. And I guess the overall benefit to having accessible chatbots and kind of systems in place like that, where you get anytime kind of therapy advice, is obviously, if we get it right, a very good thing to have. Right. But this kind of really clearly shows the need for these discussions, and why it's sort of nuanced is because we don't want to get rid of these systems. We just need to make sure that we minimize the harm whilst maximizing the benefits. So
yeah, and I guess, again, for humans, therapists have to go through all kinds of exams and qualifications to have that role. And a big reason for that is exactly, say, accountability. So, and I think do no harm, it sounds like a really obvious one, but just because it's a simple idea, it doesn't mean it's easy to implement. And it's quite deeply philosophical, I think, because if we just think about social media recommendation systems, we could argue that they are doing harm. And people might think that they're just using these systems to just look at some entertaining content, maybe their first few times, but very quickly we see a lot of people actually being addicted and have all sorts of mental health problems coming from this technology. So do no harm is actually a lot about informed consent and actually making sure people understand these systems. So I think it's a really good point. It's a really good, difficult thing to enforce. Another core part of the AI ethics landscape is sustainability. I mean, annoyingly, a lot of these problems are centered on these large language models. And there is more to AI than large language models, but I think they just have so many ethical problems that everyone's talking about them.
And I think with just the current scale of AI, right, that even if it was a different algorithm or tool, like if we were still using it to the extent that we now are across society, you'd still get these problems just at that scale.
Yes, exactly. So speaking of scale, these models are trained on the biggest data sets we've ever seen out of all the AI technologies. They use the most compute resources, so a lot of energy. Because they use a lot of energy, they get really hot, so you need a lot of water to cool them down. So we've actually done an episode on the AI's water usage.
We have. AI's drinking all the water.
So the core question is, how can we use these huge models sustainably? How can we actually have a long-term vision of the usage of them? And centered on the environment and the environmental impacts. So like maybe it's better to have the trees than have, I don't know, ChatGPT be able to solve one or two more maths problems for you. So
I think the kind of overarching message with that one, with the trees maybe that you're getting at, is we obviously want AI to do good now, but I think this policy is around like AI should be a positive force for future generations as well. Like it shouldn't just benefit us in the here and now and accelerate really quickly and then we're done. Like it should be here, and we should look at a much longer term horizon for how it can benefit society. And last one, which is a big one, and it kind of spans all of these ones we've just said, because in order to enforce any of those ethical policies or have those discussions, we need awareness and education. So many ethical frameworks stress the need for AI literacy and public engagement as well. So, people must be informed, like we were saying before, when AI is there and they're interacting with it, what it's doing, and it should empower them to then question whether it should be used in that way or even shape the decisions and how we use this technology. And importantly, we need to engage the individuals and the people who are actually consuming this AI and using these tools, and they should very much be involved, if not the most important voice in the discussion around setting the ethical boundaries for AI use.
I think the education side of it massively is related to the do no harm thing. I think it's just good to reiterate that. An uninformed society is the one that gets harmed by the recommendation system. And it really does take, sadly, it's actually the responsibility of the consumer in this current landscape with the lack of regulation. It means that it's the consumer that is left to read up about it and figure out how to healthily have a relationship with AI. So I can't stress enough. I think part of the pod is obviously to raise AI literacy and avoid the harms of AI.
I think also just one tiny last point to add to that as well is that, unless you're aware and educated about the data that goes into these systems and what they're actually doing and what these companies are doing, you as an individual might inadvertently kind of add to the harm that's being done. So I think an example of that is if you kind of use some of these image generator models, which in some instances have been trained on lots and lots of copyrighted data. Like I remember when there was that kind of thing when Studio Ghibli memes were coming out and OpenAI had this model that could generate really, really Studio Ghibli looking like photos, which is the Japanese animation studio, for those who aren't aware. I kind of, something about that felt very wrong to me and very much like copyright infringement. So as much as I really wanted to try it out, I did kind of refrain from doing so. And I think a lot of individuals, if they knew that there was, very little consent going into these systems half the time, maybe you wouldn't think to use it in the same way. So I think that's...
and spread that hype.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that goes to it as well. So
we spoke a lot about the ideals, but maybe we should try and base these into some more concrete ideas.
Yeah, let's come back to reality a little bit, yeah. So, as Riku was just saying, we now wanted to look at some of these practical challenges which are ongoing in developing AI and in the research. And the reason for doing that is because we need to clearly outline the technical hurdles which need to be overcome and solve these technical problems in order for us to develop ethical AI that meet those kind of key pillars and points that we were just highlighting. Because a lot of the reason we don't have ethical AI currently is because of how it's built and the way that it's trained. So I think the perfect first one to tee us off on that is what you're going to now discuss, isn't it, Riku?
Yes, so in the previous segment, we spoke briefly about bias and discrimination. I think hopefully we've touched on it enough that we don't need to go too in depth on it, but from a technical level. So if you imagine, again, let's think about AI system that automates CV screening. So it just reads CV and says, should this person get an interview? And again, as we mentioned before, this system will be trained on past data. So the core technical problem here, it's not that the company wants to just hire men or just hire women. They only have the data that's available to them. And if, for whatever historical context, albeit ethically or not ethically motivated, they only have a particular gender in their training data, they only have CVs from men, for example, that is a biased data set. Yep. So that is what's going to give you a biased AI system. And they might only have like a few women in their training data, and you kind of have different choices. So you could, for instance, get rid of loads of CVs and just train the model on equal number of male and female CVs. But the core idea here is there's a technical problem.
Yes.
You don't have a balanced data set.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a really nice sort of clear example as to where you have a single feature that we're focusing on the bias within that kind of aspect of the data. However, when we're scaling these data sets in the order of kind of millions and millions of data points, and then also hundreds of thousands of features to represent an individual, let's say in this instance, it becomes very hard to spot those biases. There are tests that we can do, and we're developing better tests to understand the biases in the data. But you can imagine trying to understand the bias in the entire internet is obviously a tricky challenge, and then mitigating that as well, kind of removing the bias without removing other bits of information or creating other biases is a very difficult task. So bias in the data is a really important one that we need to kind of develop new research and ways of understanding it and minimizing it.
Yeah. So that's the data bias. You do also have system biases. So you could actually imagine, so yes, the model was trained on data set, but the way you actually design the model can also massively be biased. So, and quite often they'll be trained to optimize for the majority. So if you actually imagined, this is actually a bit of a real world case, but a hospital might want to train a system to predict, say, if you have some like neurological disorder, like how that will progress. And you can imagine that that's so specific to different people's nuanced lifestyles. And you might have some edge cases. And if you don't design your AI model correctly or with this in mind, it will kind of just ignore those edge cases and only try and learn to predict the majority well. So that's like a system bias. And
I think just to give a sort of numerical example of that, let's say in your example where someone, let's say this neurological condition goes on to be fatal, and if we've got 100 individuals and 10 of them go on to be fatal, if we actually chose to train this AI system to predict who would survive, it could get 90% on that test by just predicting that every single person would survive. So that's a really clear example that we need to be very careful what exactly we're training it to predict.
Exactly.
Because it can trick us and it can get a really high score, but by neglecting an entire category of people.
So, exactly. So there's this kind of interplay between the data and the system. Another really kind of overlooked bias as well is application bias. So a good example of this is if you want to design a system that predicts crime rates in a city, that sounds really useful, right? Because you can protect your city. Now, if you actually have a data set that has historically a lot of crime in certain areas, the model will naturally predict that area will continue to have crime. So what ends up happening is you ask the model, right, where's the crime today? Oh, it's here. Oh, just like it was for the last 10 years. All right, so you send loads of police officers there, and because there's loads of police officers, guess what? You find more crime. Not because there necessarily is more crime there than other places, but that's where you sent the police officers, right? So you only can see what you're looking at.
Or the crime rate goes down over time, and you think you've solved the problem, and the crime's just gone elsewhere, and the system hasn't adapted.
Exactly. So I think that's the classic example of application bias, where you can kind of reinforce the data set that you trained it on. And of course, yes, left unchecked, this can lead to real world harm. These systems are being used in all kinds of places that affect people's lives, jobs, crime rates, not least. So actually addressing bias in automation and AI is a really difficult challenge. And just to touch on this, Huw's actually got two really nice perspectives on what to do about automation and how that can lead to more ethical usage of AI and be more inclusive.
Nice.
There's kind of two main general tools that I've seen work well. One feels like a cop-out answer. It's just like, basically consider, do you actually want to automate this decision-making process in the first place? Lots of people are trained to answer the question. And like if you don't answer a question in an exam, you get no marks. But oftentimes in my previous job, where I was a data scientist in professional services here at the university, people would want to be like, hey, can I get AI to do this? And AI was not the right answer. So I think, and again, it does feel like a bit of a cop-out answer, consider not automating the process at all. Humans have bias too, but humans are also accountable in some sense to that bias. It's a lot harder to hold a machine accountable. The other thing is more to do with like community involvement. So if you take a concrete example where you're using some decision-making tool, an automated decision-making tool to evaluate people, whether it's say like for job applications or for like a loan or
parole.
Yeah, exactly, right? I think you should ask the people who are being evaluated how they would like to be evaluated. Right? It has a bit of a mixed bag because, especially if you're developing quite a technical solution to something, if you're developing a drug for someone, you don't expect people who aren't experts in drug development to actually understand all the nuance of the things that you're doing. But if you're developing a drug for someone and you know there are some side effects, maybe that person has a better idea of what side effects they'd better be able to tolerate than you would. So you should ask them. I've been doing some work in my previous role and sort of continuing a little bit now with a clinical geneticist, Dr Kieren Riku, and she's doing a study of children with rare genetic syndromes called GenRock. And I've been really inspired by the way she's approached it as a clinician and as an academic. She's really engaged with the group of parents and these children with these rare genetic syndromes. And every time I had a research idea, she was like, cool, I'll run it by the consortium. Okay. So I generate these research ideas for her. Here's how we can use machine learning and AI to do some really novel, interesting things. And she was like, well, I'll ask them. And sometimes they said, no, I don't like the sound of that. That makes me uncomfortable. And I really respected how that was approached. And actually, so all the papers that Karen has written on the GenRock project using the data set, the GenRock consortium is a co-author. Oh, wow. And I just think that's a really wonderful way to approach it.
Nice.
Nice. We're in this world now where we just want to AI power everything. And I think like a core question is, do we actually need to automate this? So I love that. And also, Huw mentioned working with Karen Lowe, and her principle was clearly just to ask the people involved and only with their like permission and stakeholder permission would that system be put in place. So I think that would naturally address like a crime rate prediction thing. Maybe actually ask the people that are in that city how they want their police to actually operate.
It's crazy that's not the kind of status quo, right? That's just seems so logical that it's the way we should be doing things. But again, I guess maybe a scaling thing. But cool. Okay, the next one is misinformation and deepfakes, which is another technical challenge, but slightly different lens on this one because it's not really AI is not being good enough, or we need to solve some technical challenges. It's kind of because they're too good, and they're becoming really, really good at generating content that is able to deceive us, and we're finding it harder and harder to distinguish between real and AI-generated content, which poses technical challenges of its own, because it gets to the point where the onus is almost not on the humans. If we can't tell the difference on our own, that becomes a challenge for the AI companies and the people using and implementing those tools to find a way to label them and differentiate them for us. So I think for that reason, we've seen growing calls and laws as well for measures like mandatory labeling on AI-generated media. So I think a lot of the social media companies, if there's one thing I can give them credit for, it's they were quite quick to implement these labels where, granted, it's kind of reliant on people going out of their way to say that the content was AI generated, but it does have a label now on a lot of this content so that you can see straight away and quite clearly if it was human made or AI generated. But I think there's growing agreement that there needs to be some laws that enforce having those types of labels. But in addition, again, like we're just saying, that relies on the humans that are posting that content and sharing it to know the source and to state whether it was AI generated. But as you can imagine, when things get passed on and get out into the internet, it very quickly goes away from the original creator. So I think a lot of the companies developing these generative models are now looking for ways to kind of watermark, I think is the term we see a lot, but a way to add a kind of data footprint and a label that is inherent to that information from the moment that it's generated that can't be removed. And I think this is super important, so that regardless of how many times that content's been shared or passed on, we can always determine whether it was AI generated or not.
Do you want to explain a bit more about how that works?
Yeah, I think we've touched on this previously, haven't we? But that there are lots of different ways people are looking to address this now. But one of the early ones, which I think we spoke about, which was super cool with this watermarking, was that there's a kind of layer of information, so digital information that's added to an image that is imperceptible to the human eye. So it doesn't alter the way that we visually see the image, but it adds this trace that then a computer can go and kind of see that layer is there and detect that it was AI generated, but it would never change the perception of the image itself.
So it's a bit like, I don't know about you, but when I was trying to make a presentation at school, I would always find a really nice image, and then the minute I try and put it into my slides, I realize there's this horrible, like, I don't know, some company name over it, so a watermark.
Yeah.
And I think the idea here is that we don't want an annoying watermark to humans.
Yes.
But we want an annoying watermark for the AI. So if an AI system kind of looks at this image, they'll be like, whoa, what is this?
And I think the example of that is another nice intuition. So on my bike that I cycle to work with, I have insured the bike, and it comes with this invisible marker pen that you write in quite big writing that it's been insured, but you never see it, but then you shine a UV light onto the bike and you can see that mark is there. And it's therefore very hard to remove. Maybe you need a special type of, if we're talking about the AI now, maybe only the companies have the UV light so no one else can go and remove it. So this is an intuition as to what we're trying to get at.
So we touched on transparency earlier, and I think it's good just to build a bit more on why we have this problem in the first place. And the core idea is that these AI systems are solving complex tasks.
Yep.
And it sounds obvious, but a complex task needs a complex model. And this introduces a core trade-off. So you can imagine thinking of a really simple model. So maybe if you want to predict the weather tomorrow, you just predict for the last 3 days. You just take the average or something like that. Really simple idea. That might do okay, but you could imagine that if you use the last year of data, loads of news reports or like meteorological information and a huge neural network, dare I say, you could do better.
Yes.
And this is the core problem, is that if you want to solve these complex tasks, you have to kind of solve it in a complex way a lot of the time. And then all of a sudden you have this black box problem we were talking about earlier, where this model is now so big that there's too many numbers. It's so hard for a human to look at the model and go, because of the last 5,482 numbers and this news report, tomorrow will be sunny. It's just too difficult for a human to understand. So that's the core reason we have this transparency issue, is that these models are so big that it's so hard for a human brain to understand.
Also helps us to understand why there's kind of little incentive to focus on explainability and why it lags behind so much, because there's just a race to the top to get the most capable and accurate AI model, the most complex system that can do the most amazing things for us. That directly goes against making it easy to understand.
Yeah, I mean, would you rather have an accurate weather report that you don't really know why it's saying that, but it's always right?
Which
or
I think
one that's kind of wrong a lot of the time, but it kind of tells you why it made its decision that was wrong anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is why this discussion is often very context dependent, depending on where we're using this AI system and how high the stakes are.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you'd actually rather a simple decision that's kind of wrong, but you at least know why it said that. So
yeah, well, I
that's a
think
good
maybe
point,
not simple. Yeah, I think medical diagnosis and medical image detection is a good example of that, right?
Yeah, and actually, I hope I can demystify this really quickly. But for an image classifier, so you can imagine you send your X-ray to an AI system that's trained to predict some cancer. The way they actually try and like make these crazy neural networks like more transparent is they call it a perturbation, but that's just a crazy word for saying a lot of smudging. So you can imagine like if you smudge random bits of your like X-ray image, if smudging that bit may change the decision that the clean image, so the unsmudged image did, you could kind of infer that that part of the image was important. Yeah, and that's kind of how a lot of the explainability methods work today.
It's really simple, but like nice way to do it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and of course they do the smudging in a clever way, more complicated than that, but that's the idea.
Cool. So next one is maybe less of a technical challenge and more of a kind of implementation or organizational challenge, which is around accountability and liability. So I think the problem here is that AI outcomes emerge from a very, very complex and long chain of contributions. Maybe if we do just talk about the technical development of them to begin with, we've got kind of data engineers who source the training data, clean it, process it, hopefully remove biases in it, algorithm designers, the AI kind of algorithm itself that is then fundamentally making the decisions, and then lastly the kind of user or practitioner that's deploying it. So there's a very complex web and chain of individuals that go into that final decision probably, and we need to therefore have these kind of human accountability chains. So we need to see who is responsible at all different stages of the life cycle of that AI system, all the way from its inception to its use. Which means that an organization using an AI must designate these kind of specific people who are accountable for AI outcomes. So it can't be kind of just put off to the AI system. We can't kind of use that classic excuse, which was said before, which is like the algorithm made me do it, so to speak. So yeah, I think again, this goes to sort of incentive structures. And, you know, if we're trying to have the most accountability and make sure that the user and the person who is ultimately affected by the outcome of the AI decision, if we have them at heart and at mind all throughout that design life cycle, then I think there will be a sort of incentive for accountability throughout that all those stages. And yeah, I think the key theme there is that, you know, if these systems, which they are currently, are being developed by private companies and companies which have a financial incentive to make profit, that is where the kind of decisions are going to be made, and that's where the incentive and the liability is going to be held. You know, there's much more at stake if you're going to kind of potentially bankrupt your company than maybe one individual sues you for some kind of bad AI decisions. And yeah, you don't have to just take our word for this, because one interesting thing we saw when chatting to Huw was that across all these discussions and conversations that he's been having around these ethical conversations around AI and data, we asked him if there were any kind of recurring themes which come up that make it a difficult challenge in developing these systems ethically. And those kind of conversations around incentives and capital we see come up quite frequently. So here's Huw on the topic.
So I think the most common theme is probably like capitalism. And so we talk a lot about financial incentives and I guess indirectly sort of time pressure, which often leads to unethical practices. So there's if you've ever read the book Careless People, which is about, is written by someone who used to work at Meta, formerly Facebook. And allegedly Mark Zuckerberg had a sign in the Facebook headquarters that said, "Move fast and break stuff." And we regularly bring that quote up at Data Ethics Club. Recently, one of the attendees said something like, "I wanted to move fast, but I didn't mean to break things." And that was kind of a sort of a reflection on that desire for progress, which is often financially motivated if you're, say, doing a piece of research where you have a deadline, which is grant-based, for example, but also in the corporate world where you need to get like an output out so you can commercialize it. That is often not like diametrically opposed to ethical practice, but ethics can be a diversion to that goal. A necessary diversion, but if someone's just focused on kind of number go up, then they'll deprioritize ethics often. But if there's situations where the incentive structure doesn't incentivize you to do those things, and your biggest incentive is money, then that can kind of fall apart. We did have a discussion on an article called something like "Ethics is the New Currency" or something like that, and it was discussing how various big tech companies in Silicon Valley were sort of selling themselves as ethical through particular lenses, in a way to kind of become more popular with their customer base. So a classic example of this is various large companies involved with making generative AI technologies being like, we're really worried about the sort of AI apocalypse happening in the future. We've suggested these laws that maybe should be passed to restrict companies on how they develop and train these models. And then it turns out that this to-do list is things that those companies are already doing, and lots of those things would sort of be restrictive to a smaller company trying to be a competitor.
Oh wow.
So it is. So it just so happens that it might be sort of ethically aligned in some sense, but it's not because they necessarily care about the ethics.
Got you.
And lastly, it's kind of the big mama of practical ethical issues of AI is the impact on employment and the workforce just generally.
Yeah.
So.
But the listeners are probably like, about time. Why have you not spoken about this topic earlier in the episode?
I mean, I think it's kind of most people's fear right now in this current landscape, AI hype, is that AI is going to take everyone's jobs. And I mean, we are seeing a lot of evidence that AI can boost productivity and free people from what they don't want to do. But on the other hand, it does massively threaten a lot of people who've spent a lot of time building these expertise that can really quickly be displaced by AI overnight. I mean, imagine how long it takes to be an amazing painter, and you get these models that, to someone like me, appears like pretty good art.
Exactly. And I think we mentioned this in our episode on Is AI About to Take My Job? There's kind of no clear alternative from these systems currently, right? It's not kind of solving one thing whilst producing another problem. It's doing everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's like solving that like bottom-up approach to solving tasks in general, right? And that's the core problem, is that these people that are displaced, they don't have a clear alternative. And maybe historically when a technology comes out, you kind of rely on human adaptability being faster than an AI's.
Yes.
But that kind of isn't the case anymore. Like
Really
a lot of these AI
yeah.
systems can adapt faster than us. So
and the cost of it as well, it's a lot cheaper, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So just to back us up on this, one of the biggest companies developing a large language model called Anthropic, their CEO actually predicted that AI could replace 50% of entry-level white-collar roles within the next 5 years.
Wow,
so
that's soon.
that's going to affect so many people's lives and society's well-being as a whole. And I think that's the core ethical tension there.
We definitely do not have a solution to that yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. And again, this is only worth it if the gains of AI actually kind of make up for this huge movement of people and all their labor and all their efforts to go somewhere else. And yeah, as you say, I don't think we really know what to do about that. And it's hard to predict, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, those kind of net gains, like even if it's really beneficial to that individual company and its shareholders and the individuals working there, if that means that like hundreds of people go out of a job, then that's obviously not a net positive, is it?
Yeah, and just practically speaking as well, I mean, an AI robot shop clerk can work 24 hours. I mean, if every shop did that, then there'll never be a closing hour for your favorite shop. So you can see how there could be a huge gain actually for society. But is it worth the cost? I mean, all these shops no longer have humans working for them. They have to go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And we have to care about them too. We don't just bundle them into a building.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think like an early example of like how to solve this is like a robot tax. So obviously you're not really paying that robot a salary, but that robot's going to cost like extra, not just its running costs, but extra. And the money that some of the money that you would have saved on a salary should still go somewhere, I think is the idea.
Yeah, I think one theme discussed in that is using some of the savings that are made from automation to actually upskill and retrain employees that are there rather than just kind of like sacking them. So that's a really cool idea for it.
Wow, and I mean, this is quite future focused, but if we actually look back, before we even get to large language models, AI technology has actually contributed massively to unethical jobs. So actually building the data sets to train these large models requires huge human labor, and the way we got that human labor isn't super ethical. And we're really lucky to talk to Huw about this, who's done a lot of research on it. So here's Huw.
I've just finished reading Empire of AI. And so in chapter 9 of the book is called Disaster Capitalism. And In it, the author has gone and interviewed various so-called mechanical Turk workers. These are individuals who are typically paid sort of contract rates to do, I guess you could say, menial data labeling tasks.
How does it work? Like, are they on a website? Or?
Yeah, so I think Amazon were one of the first companies to sort of have this as a product, essentially. And you could sign up to be one of these Turk workers, and then you would just be given a task. And so the classic task for pre-ChatGPT AI things was labeling images, whether that's for various data sets like ImageNet, which is a famous data set, which was like a big competition, but also more recently it was for images for like self-driving cars and stuff like that. But when OpenAI and presumably other large language model developers were encountering problems of the language models they had developed, which had been trained on all of the internet, which includes all of the horrible things on the internet, when these models were starting to output really heinous things, they wanted a way to kind of stop them do that. And the best way to do that, or at least the best way that they currently have to do that, is to have a bunch of examples of text that's either heinous or not, and then label it as such. And so they would pay mechanical Turk workers to do this work. And so in the book, they talk about an individual who grew up in Western Kenya, and he had a job as a mechanical Turk. And so he worked for a company that was contracted by OpenAI. His job title was quality analyst on the sexual content team. Wow. And so what his job involved was looking at both real life, like from the internet, but also large language model generated posts, text, of a deeply disturbing nature. And it's an extremely harrowing profession, and not a very well-paying one either. He talks about how he tried to compartmentalize his work and his home life, but the hours are often very sporadic. If you're trying to release a new model, then you need more labels more quickly, and so like we were talking about those incentive structures. We want to release this model by a certain time. We want to beat our competitors, for example. We need to rush this thing, so we need to pay more people to do it, right? And so he was really struggling, and all of his coworkers were, asking for sick leave or family leave, finding any excuses they could to not go to work because their job was so horrible. They did get some counselling, but it was often group counselling, and they got the impression that the people running the counselling didn't actually know what jobs that they had, right?
Oh, wow.
And so this individual was deeply affected, and he was withdrawing from his friends and his wife, but he just didn't know how to talk to them. How do you be like, hey, today at work I read this really horrible piece of text, right? Eventually his wife left him, and so he called his brother who lived on the other side of the country, and so his brother very nobly dropped everything, drove across the country and moved in with him. And because his brother had done an English literature degree, to get a new job, he started freelancing as a writer. And then a few months later, with all the labeling that had been done, OpenAI would release ChatGPT 3. And one by one, this guy's brother's writing contracts began to disappear because this very model that he had helped train was now replacing his labor. Wow. So it's a really dreadful but quite curious kind of closed loop. And there's just a quote from the individual who worked as a Turk worker who said, "I'm very proud that I participated in that project to make ChatGPT safe. But now the question I always ask myself, was my input worth what I received in return?"
Wow. Yeah, I guess this is the side of these models being trained and developed that so many people aren't aware of.
For
and
sure.
Definitely not in the best interest of these companies to get out into the public domain, is it? And
it's often outsourced to countries in the global south because the salaries are lower, so it's cheaper work to do.
Yeah.
There's this idea of lexical overrepresentation, which where certain words, like delved is a common one, kind of emerge more frequently in outputs from generative models than you would expect based on literature that we would read.
Yep.
this tends to be based on the nationalities and the sort of individual sort of sociolect of the individuals involved in labeling the data. But interestingly, when companies are sort of mocked for this, their response is to just stop contracting in that country. So that means that people who are really dependent on this very awful working conditions, they are now like,
wow,
they lose their jobs.
Hung out to dry, basically.
Yeah, hung out to dry. Yeah, exactly.
Wow, yeah, that was a really harrowing and I think impactful story that I think anyone using chatbots needs to hear, that things like that are being facilitated from training these models, and that's how things were being done. But yeah, we then went on to ask Huw, just kind of trying to draw a bit of analogy to one maybe we're all a bit more familiar with, which I guess is fast fashion and very cheap manual labor for producing clothes that, without naming any companies, I think a lot of us now make a conscious decision to not consume stuff from those particular companies because of what we know about how their products are being made. So we wanted to know if there's maybe an analogy there for having a similar mindset when we use and interact with chatbots and other AI systems.
I would challenge the assertion that there's like not enough money to go around. I just think it's all like how much I'm trying to recall how much Meta were offering as a signing bonus to AI engineers.
It was over 100
in the
million.
tens of millions. Yeah,
I think it was over 100.
it was over 100. Yeah.
I think they can afford to pay the data labelers more.
Yeah.
But do we wait then for the ethical chatbot to come out? Like what is the ethical stance on actually using ChatGPT if it is analogous to fast fashion?
I think that has to be like quite individual and has to be like weighed up quite a lot. I think I'm not quite sure I guess with the analogy with fast fashion, there's quite a clear connect between the like profit margins and like I buy a fast fashion piece of clothing and then there's like the bits of money that go to different people, right? If I use, say, a free version of a language model, then to me it's not particularly clear where the profit comes from. I understand that actually it sounds like they're desperately trying to look for ways that they can make money from these technologies. So in terms of the, I guess, like sort of guilt associated with using a language model or something like that, I think it's there. I mean, like the environmental impact, I understand that every time I prompt ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude that I'm making the environment a little bit worse. But I think sort of in aggregate, the demand is the thing that is making more of these data labelers have to do more of this like alignment work and stuff like that. Yeah, I think, I guess I don't have a really clear stance. I also don't feel comfortable like asserting what I think someone else's clear stance should be. So I think the best that we can do, and this is something why I really appreciate the work that you guys do, is that like you should make people as well informed as possible to make these decisions for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Huw made, that it's obviously a very personal decision, and we need to just educate ourselves about what's going on in order to kind of set our own moral compass, and I think also have more of these discussions, like make others aware, because I think often how we decide what's morally right and wrong is not necessarily every single individual doing that on their own. It's through discussion and discourse and society coming to consensus. So I think, telling people that you know that this stuff is going on is pretty important. If you've listened to this episode, we'd really like it if you could pass on the word.
Yeah, I think it's really nice. It is one of those things which is good to be informed, and maybe your subconscious mind will think for a bit about what you actually want to do about it. And I can definitely say for myself that after looking into the environmental impacts of these large-scale AI models, it's massively affected how I use them, and like I kind of stopped asking them really stupid stuff when I'm bored now. So
yeah, I'm the same. Use it way less, don't you? Yeah. Right. I think it's time for a much-needed fun fact, don't you?
Oh, definitely.
Let's do it. So yeah, we're just going to have a quick break, fun fact, before we look at how real-world legislation is starting to tackle and address some of these ethical challenges.
Wow, I didn't realize you didn't do that in post. That's wild. It sounds exactly the same as the podcast.
Nice, fun fact. So who's going first?
Well, I have to make a little confession, Riku.
Oh, really?
I'm going to depend on Huw a little bit too much in this episode now, because I kind of forgot that we had to do a fun fact this
Oh,
time.
no.
Or, well, I was too focused on the plan and stressing because it was such a big topic. And,
No, very fair, very fair.
Yeah, I mean, I could have obviously looked for one, but I was lazy, and I've relied on Huw here because he came with a lovely fun fact that I didn't want to take any of the limelight from him there, so I'll let him take the stage and tell us his fun fact.
So my fun fact is about a paper that I've been reading recently called Transformers Need Glasses. And so in this paper, they did some experiments where they took a language model and they asked it to do tasks that were like on the surface easy in terms of quality, but they asked them to do it a lot. And they watched how the performance degraded over time.
Okay,
so
can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so if you ask a language model 1 + 1, odds are, I mean, it will probably give you lots of fluff, but it will tell you 2, right? It will kind of format it in a nice
having a lovely day. And,
I hope you're having a lovely day, and I'm
2.
so glad you're learning maths, but it's 2, right? Ask it 1 + 1 + 1, it'll probably give you 3.
That'll probably say, do you now want to know 2 + 2?
Yeah, I know, it's right. But eventually, if you ask it 1 + 1 + 1 enough times, then it ends up starting to get it wrong. And so they were saying like, oh yeah, Transformers need glasses because they're actually not able to like consider the whole context of this thing. And I think it's hilarious that like these really sophisticated neural network systems, which are built on computers, which on the like are designed with ones and zeros in mind, is really bad at these kind of things. So yeah, that's my fun fact.
Counting how many R's are in strawberry wasn't embarrassing enough. I think this one's worse.
So true.
Very fun.
To be fair, for our listeners that don't know, when you forget your fun fact, it is a real job to find one
it really
within
is.
10 minutes.
We thought it was going to be such an easy little segment to add in. And finding an AI funny and fun fact of something that's happened very recently is tough.
I mean, speaking of which, my fun fact, I don't think it's really that funny, and it's not super AI related. But
classic. You're getting a bit of a pattern here, Riku.
I know, I'm sorry. Maybe I should just not do these anymore, but
maybe we need a new segment.
Yeah, true. So in the early 2000s, Steve Potter, someone from Georgia Tech University, and Thomas DeMars, University of Florida, they grew 25,000 rat neurons in a petri dish, and they got it to learn to fly a real life flight simulator. So the kind of one that like a human would fly to train as a pilot.
That's crazy.
And that's kind of crazy, and it's kind of AI related because, as I said last time, an avian intelligence.
Well, that's definitely a lot closer to an artificial neural network, I would say, because we've built it.
I guess it is a neural network, so I don't know, it kind of counts, right? It's not a real...
truly artificial,
Don't really know what I'm saying now. But the way it worked, basically, is that these biological neurons, so unlike these neural networks that we have for these large language models and all the other AI, these biological neurons have a natural tendency to basically try and stabilize the signals that go between them. So there's little...
homeostasis.
Oh, wow. Nice. What happens is you plug the simulator into the neurons, and when the plane is unstable, it sends like an unstable signal into the petri dish. And the natural kind of ability of these neurons to like self-organize and stabilize will stabilize themselves, which is what's controlling the simulator.
Wow.
And
can fly the plane.
Yeah, and it essentially just stabilizes it. It learns to stabilize the plane, even though it has no idea what buttons it's controlling.
Yeah. Or that it's flying.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any idea how much responsibility it's got.
Yeah, so...
That is fun. That's interesting.
That's quite interesting.
Cool. Now, back to the episode. Okay, welcome back. So now we are going to be talking about what has actually been going on in the law throughout the world in different countries, and also what some different organizations have been doing to actually try and implement some of these ethical frameworks and boundaries, so legislate against these things going wrong. And we're going to be particularly focusing on the UK and the EU and also the US, mainly because these are kind of main English-speaking countries where we obviously probably stayed clued into a lot of what's going on, and also, some of the main places that AI is being developed. And we'll look a little bit on the kind of global landscape, just touching on it at the end. But yeah, it's very interesting to kind of reflect on the different approaches that these countries are taking, and maybe it can help you decide which one resonates most with you, and then perhaps you can then go and speak to your local MP or politician to try and enforce some of those laws here in the UK. So do you want to tee us off firstly? Ironically, we're not looking at the UK to begin with, are we? But there is a reason we're starting off with the European Union. Yes,
and we do have this crazy challenge to actually try and make regulation sound fun. So let's do our best with that. Yes, I think excitingly, the EU is actually... well, actually, historically being the ones that actually kind of set the strictest laws, more generally speaking, and that's kind of why we're starting with them now, is they're actually the only region out of the ones we'll talk about today, or actually globally, that have a concrete, comprehensive AI law.
Wow. The EU often leads the way with policy, and then other countries kind of follow suit, don't they, historically?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a really famous example of that is the GDPR laws. Yep. So it's now kind of called this Brussels effect. So in Brussels, where they had this like big EU meeting, and they decided to have all these privacy laws, and then basically loads of other countries they were like, it takes loads of time to come up with laws.
That sounds good enough to me.
Use that one. Yeah. So nice. So thank the EU for clicking accept cookies all the time. So bear in mind that this EU AI Act has been in the making for many, many years.
Yeah.
But it's really taken a lot of attention recently because it's just started, bits of it are getting actually implemented and actionable as of this year in 2025.
Yeah.
And hopefully it was clear from the first half just how complicated and nuanced it is to talk about the risks of this technology and how to regulate it. I mean, do no harm is so vague. I mean, it's so simple conceptually, but what is harm and all that? And that's the main motivation of the EU Act, is actually focusing on the risk of harm. And they grade it into 4 levels. So they have from worst, unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. And then they have different rules based on the risk. So seems pretty intuitive. Importantly, I actually read through it, and it's kind of faced towards companies. So if you're a company that actually wants to develop a AI-related tool, the way it's written is really useful for you as a kind of like a CEO or someone. Organization, sorry, yeah. And they have a really nice tool actually that's kind of like a decision tree. It's like a questionnaire that tells you what applies to you. But as like an individual and just like just a normal person in society, it's quite bleak and hard to read. So just as a word of warning. So let's talk about what is outright banned. So these are the unacceptable risk category AIs. So these are systems that involve like social scoring of individuals. Right. So we mentioned earlier, with the privacy stuff, they're like, we don't want any of that. So no kind of tracking you and where you're walking in the streets and your social score.
Because it could be done, couldn't it, with kind of current technology and the amount of CCTVs that we have, especially in the UK. But
very easily,
this is in the EU obviously now, but this has been banned altogether as an application, right?
Yeah. You can imagine using AI to exploit vulnerable groups, so maybe elderly or children. So they actually put in their harmful AI toys, which actually sounds crazy. Yeah. And also intrusive real-time biometric surveillance. So again, focusing on the privacy side of things. They have high-risk AI. So these are AI technologies in medical devices, transportation, critical infrastructure. Yep. So you don't want you to have a blackout just because an AI made the wrong decision, right? So it has to be very strict regulation before that can be put in place. So these are not banned, but they're subject to very strict oversight. So naturally, you could imagine that maybe there's like an energy optimization algorithm that would be really useful for a country, but you really don't want to implement that unless you're really sure it conforms to like human oversight, these transparency things we're talking about, and making sure like we know who's accountable when things go wrong.
Yes.
And surprisingly, on the limited risk category actually is like generative AI, so like image generators, chatbot, with the nuance of if you're informed that you're interacting with an AI.
Right.
I thought that was quite interesting, but I guess it's maybe if you put them in high risk, it really makes them like impossible for like a corporation to release.
Yeah, possibly. And I guess they're so general too, right? That it's maybe hard to then put them in a high risk if they could be used for kind of very mundane day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, it must be said actually, these general purpose AIs, so GP AIs actually in the Act, they actually come in a separate category. And the funny thing is that one of the people actually made the AI Act called Mazzini, he was saying that they spent years making the EU Act and they had more traditional AI, so like predictive monitoring for like healthcare things and these more traditional AI systems in mind when they made it. And then 2022 happened and they had to create a whole new super fast regulation to talk about these general purpose AIs.
ChatGPT came out,
but yeah, interestingly, they do say like they have some really interesting laws actually to put in place for these. So like you have to disclose the copyright content that you put in the training data for these AIs. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll talk about that more another time. And then on the low risk category, we actually have things like spam filters. So you can thank the EU for letting those roam free. So in your Gmail, your spam filter can roam without any serious regulation. And they didn't just smash this regulation down in one swoop. They started implementing it from this year, 2025.
Yeah.
And the goal was actually to have it kind of fully implemented by 2027. Again, there's maybe we'll touch on it a bit later actually, but there's a lot of pushback on what the EU did with the AI Act. So.
Right, okay, and as I'm sure with governments, timelines will change and things will come in at different points. So, cool. Now on to the United Kingdom, where we reside. And obviously, since leaving the European Union, we can now set our own laws in these things and don't have to abide by those. Now we can make a decision on whether it was a good or bad idea, given how we're choosing to legislate AI, which is, quote, a pro-innovation approach to AI regulation. And it's a much more hands-off approach than the EU's taking, because the EU's legislation is very broad and encompassing, and from a sort of top-down, the UK's approach so far has been a lot more flexible and kind of bottom-up in the sense that it's very sector-specific, depending on where that AI is being used. And in 2023, the UK published an AI regulation policy paper, which is where that title came from, a pro-innovation approach to AI regulation. And it proposed these kind of core principles, such as the ones we were mentioning before, so safety, transparency, fairness, accountability, etc. But rather than immediately putting those into laws, which were then implemented in the way that the EU is doing, it kind of encouraged existing regulators, like those in the kind of health sector, finance, transportation, to kind of interpret those recommendations within the context of their sector and enforce them on their own account. This is mainly so that we could have this kind of adaptability, so that it wasn't this kind of overarching law for what we currently perceived AI systems to be, and it allowed us to be flexible and to evolve as the technology itself evolves and develops into something very different, which, as we know, things are changing pretty quickly. Without kind of having very permanent and overbearing legislation, which might, by the kind of definition, stifle that progress and innovation in the UK. But this doesn't mean they're kind of completely hands-off. So it has created these kind of oversight bodies, which are specifically focused on making sure that these different sectors are focusing on these recommendations and implementing them accordingly. So two of which are the Office for AI and the new AI Safety Institute. So these kind of independent bodies whose, you know, as the latter name suggests, are specifically focused on safety and these ethical questions, and kind of monitoring these different risks like the ones we've been talking about, and help coordinate on certain policies and laws that will help enforce them. However, interestingly, in July last year, 2024, the King of England gave a speech, and within that, he proposed a set of binding measures on AI, which kind of deviates from that very hands-off, flexible plan that the government was taking. And it specifically plans to establish, quote, appropriate legislation to place requirements on those developing the most powerful AI models. So I think that's hinting at these enormous companies that are building very, very large data centers, very, very large chatbots, and kind of leading the way with the latest AI research to kind of really restrict those companies and make sure they're doing it in an ethical way. But the UK on a whole is definitely trying to strike this balance, I think, from what we've seen with this recommendation, that it's definitely encouraging AI growth and trying to be a leader in AI technology and the benefits that it can bring, but through a kind of light touch on the governance side of things. But obviously that's very hard because you still want to mitigate some very kind of negative things which could happen and go wrong in society. But yeah, it's kind of doing that without imposing very strict and hard laws at this point in time.
I didn't know the King was an AI expert.
Neither did I, no, but we kind of have to listen.
But yeah, it's actually really cool. I think like what the UK is doing is, it's an interesting take, because they do have these voluntary sandboxes available. So what I think the core kind of question here is like, how do you balance that innovation with safety, as you just mentioned?
Yeah.
And the EU kind of went hardcore regulation, and I think they're doubling down on the idea that, again, ethics is not like a block. It can be a win-win. And the idea is that people, like the general public, will value safety enough such that companies that invest in safety will be better off for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess the rest, I mean, yeah, we'll go into it, but that there's a different kind of angle to that, which is less safety and just go all in on like letting people loose and figuring out what people want.
Which I do wonder if by that kind of UK definition that, you know, they don't want that kind of heavy ethical legislation to stifle progress, kind of goes into the narrative and the preconception that ethics does inherently go directly against technological innovation, when I guess the message we're trying to convey here that we said from the start is that they need to be kind of entangled from the outset. And actually when we do, it's a net positive because we maximize benefits and minimize harm. So I wonder if that kind of goes against that in the way that we're legislating things. And in reality, if you do impose hard laws, you can't get out of thinking about ethics, but then we need to focus a lens on how do we maximize benefit, knowing that we have to answer these ethical questions.
Yeah, I mean, global AI arms race, right? So
exactly,
everyone's kind of scared of AGI, whatever that
Speaking of which, the next big country to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the place where it's all kind of started with ChatGPT, so in the United States. And I would say they're quite analogous to the UK. They don't really have a dedicated law towards AI ethics. They have been recently actually releasing like more guidelines and frameworks for people working and developing AI technology to follow. Yeah. But it's not like legally binding. There's no like clear, like reparations or like fines that are outlined in the EU Act. They're more chill.
I guess also the US has the added complexity of state versus federal law as well, right? It's often kind of who is to decide on the policies.
Yeah, land the free. And yeah, I mean, to be fair, in 2022, it's quite early on, relatively speaking. They did release a non-binding AI Bill of Rights, and this kind of outlined kind of principles that we're touching on earlier, so bias-free systems, privacy, but again, not binding in any way.
Yeah, I think theirs was even less than the UK stance in that it was strong recommendations, and theirs was like a blueprint for what a Bill of Rights would look like, but it was by no means an actual Bill of Rights.
Yeah, sounds quite fitting, dare I say. But I mean, all 50 states have agreed by 2025 to introduce some form of AI-related legislation, but it's not. I mean, it's already October, and there's no hard law being established so far. So
yeah, I think a lot of those ones at the state level that everyone agrees on are those ones around kind of deepfakes and autonomous vehicles, I think was the other one.
Right, yeah. Maybe speaking more globally, we have non-governmental organisations. So do you want to touch a bit on that?
Yeah, so these are kind of, like Rick was saying, more independent organisations which are often solely focused on looking at technological advancements and the ethical questions that come with them. So the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, they've adopted some AI principles way back in 2019, which have been endorsed by lots and lots of countries now as well, actually. And I think they've taken inspiration from these principles, encouraging trustworthy AI that respects human rights and democratic values. So I think, again, like we were saying earlier, it's kind of core to a lot of those principles is turning the lens onto the humans that are using and being affected by those AI systems. The other one, which again we mentioned at the start, which we based a lot of this episode on, were UNESCO's principles, and 193 member states have actually now agreed on those recommendation of AI ethics, which is why we kind of picked those as the sort of blueprint to discuss on. And yeah, as we were mentioning earlier, you have like groups of individuals that come together, and AI researchers. We've seen that early letter to kind of pause and halt AI progress. I think that was back in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, that was signed by a lot of people. And now we've seen another one come out, which is a slightly different lens that's rather than halt things, it's saying that we should outright ban the development of superintelligence in the current way that we're building AI. And we need to think a lot of things through before we keep kind of plowing down this trajectory. And yeah, we've seen a lot of these independent organizations and groups have large signatories which then make their way to kind of government level often and influence policy.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So the OECD principles seemed fairly reasonable by different countries, but just this year, actually, there was like a summit in Paris, February 2025, and they were proposing for... essentially, it was called an AI declaration. So pledge on open, inclusive, and ethical approach to technological development.
Okay.
We actually had the UK and the US refuse to sign this.
Wow.
We had so Japan, China, France, India, Canada, and many, many other countries did sign it. So
interesting. Do we know why?
Well, the idea, what they said is that it was too ambiguous, and
Right.
I think they didn't want to sign something that they weren't sure what was being committed to at the time. Like maybe they didn't want to get their words twisted.
Right.
I think that is kind of the landscape we're at today with regulation, is that we still don't really know what to do about it. It's so unclear when we say do no harm, when it comes, we kind of have an intuition of what that means. But when it comes to regulation and it's time to put the hammer down, companies are going to find a way to get around soft regulations. And I think it's just really difficult right now to actually regulate. And the core reason for this is about auditing and actually validating whether any of these principles that we've highlighted have been violated. So when we say, do no harm, be transparent, no bias, how do we actually validate that? It's all good we know where we want things to be, but how do you tell when something isn't? And that's kind of the core problem in regulation right now. And there are some really cool initiatives actually that are trying to look into this. And one of them is called Art AI. And they're basically building a system that is integrated into YouTube. And they found that if you type in, so you can design like a persona. So it's almost like simulating the cookies that the algorithm learns about you.
Oh, wow.
And they found that if you give the persona of a 16-year-old teenage girl, within like 20 recommended videos of, if you just type in fashion as your initial video, you start seeing like loads of nudity and like loads of really inappropriate content for a 16-year-old. So that's one way of highlighting like measurably whether these systems are like potentially doing harm.
Really interesting. I hadn't come across that.
Yeah, I came across it actually in a conference I was at the other day.
Wow.
So.
Cool. Okay, so I think that's a perfect transition into the final segment, just to quickly wrap up, which is looking more broadly now, kind of outside of just government legislation. What are the key things we need to really focus on and kind of take responsibility for moving forward to have beneficial society level AI, and who is able to kind of impact those decisions, because it's not just the big tech companies and the governments. We also have a role to play. So shall we quickly wrap up and discuss that?
Let's do it. Nice. I really like how you summarize that, because again, we need to remember that this technology isn't being built for superintelligence or AGI, even though a lot of companies are obviously going with that goal. The core thing we really want, and as a society we want, is actually to build a more harmonious society, one where we're all healthier and actually benefiting from this technology as an individual.
Yeah. That's why we got into doing AI research and developing it, right? Because we thought it could be a force for good, and it still can be.
I know. I mean, but sometimes I feel like now that I say I do AI, people are like,
I know, right?
Bastard.
Yeah, you're ruining the planet.
Like, no, I did it before chatbots were cool.
I know.
And causing problems.
Let's get it back on track.
Yeah, let's do it. So a core part of this segment is to talk about how, sadly, with the current regulatory landscape, we can't really trust these providers to optimize societal harmony for us. So we need to speak practically what, as consumers, we can actually do, how we can actually vote with our feet and shape this technology going forwards. And sadly, what do we do with this burden of having to navigate all the harmful AIs and all the harmful impacts it can have on us? So the core idea is that we are one of the major stakeholders in this game, and there's something we can do about it.
Exactly. So we've touched on a couple of those stakeholders, but as Rick was just touching on, we need a multi-stakeholder effort. So technologists, as we mentioned, so the people actually designing and building AI, us as well, got a big responsibility of our shoulders, designing AI with these ethical considerations in mind. And I think I just kind of luckily started researching and thinking about these things on my own accord when I started my PhD, but there was no real kind of incentive or education structure there. Maybe yours was slightly different because you had some taught modules, but really making sure that those are baked in with research and as researchers and developers from the get-go, and that can come all the way from school level as well and university and then through to researchers. So that's super important. And Huw actually had a really nice example of what a kind of ethical development of an AI from technologists looks like, and how you involve the kind of individuals who are giving the data for that system and then it's kind of impacting. So here's Huw to give a nice example of what that should look like.
So in the epilogue of Empire of AI, which is called How the Empire Falls, but there's an anecdote about a couple from Hawaii who wanted to help preserve a dying indigenous language. I don't want to try and pronounce it because I'm just going to butcher it. And so one of the guys in this couple, he ran a public radio station that broadcast in this language as part of an effort to sort of help it stay alive, essentially. And I should also add that large language models are definitely making languages die out more, because if you have more people speaking the languages that are only trained on LLMs, then there's less people who are using these dying languages that aren't supported by them, right? So this guy realized that he had a huge amount of recorded audio of people speaking this dying language. So he thought if he could transcribe all of this, then it would be like really helpful for language learning efforts and like teaching. And so he wanted to do it automatically. And so his partner had the idea of training a speech recognition model. So this is a model that an AI model that takes in audio and outputs text, right? This was back in 2016, and so the transformer architecture, which underlies LLMs, was sort of published in 2017. Attention is all you need, right? But the technology for speech recognition was there, and so before embarking on this project, what they did is they went to the community who spoke this indigenous language in Hawaii, and to the elders, and they asked them, like, is this something that you want, right? And so it was like I was saying earlier, I think if the elders had said no, they would have just not done it. I don't know them personally, but that's the impression I got from hearing about this story, right? So, and it turns out the elders were like, well, we don't want this language to die. So, like, tell us more about this. So, to collect the training data that they needed, they would go to people and be like, okay, here's a full explanation of what the data is going to be used for. Are you willing to participate? And if the answer was no, they'd be like, great, have a nice day, and then not get any data from them, right? And to maximize this model's benefit to the community, they listened to the community and asked them, like, what kind of language learning resources would be most helpful, right? And they also were really careful about how they stored the data. They didn't open source it. They created a process by which the data that was collected would continue to be a resource for future benefit of the community, but it wouldn't be co-opted for other projects that the community didn't consent to, right?
Yeah.
So even though they had this resource that would have been really useful, you could imagine all sorts of academic studies on linguistics and things like that. They only if the community were okay with it being used was it released for other projects, right? And once they were upfront about the benefits of AI and they told people about how their data was being handled, they received 310 hours of high-quality transcribed audio from around 2,500 people. So that's not just people recording themselves talking, that's them taking the time to record it with a proper microphone and then taking the time to transcribe the words that they have said, which is a lot of work, right? You guys both work in AI. Can you imagine how big of an effort it would be to like collect that data yourself, or pay Mechanical Turk work to do it, even if you weren't paying them very much, which if you were using one of these platforms you wouldn't. But people were willing to donate their data once they understood and consented to the project.
And the impact it was having.
And so I think that's a really nice model for how things could be done. And I think there's obviously this tension here because, like I said, if people say no, then you're done. But I think there's some wisdom there that actually like, and this is perhaps one of the problems these companies have with commercialization. They can't think of enough ways to get people to pay for the product to use it for things. If they'd asked people first, maybe they would have those ways. Maybe if they said to people, we want to make this thing that can like output text in some sense. What do you want it to do? Then maybe if they had those ideas to start with, they would be, pardon the pun, like better aligned with that goal.
Nice, that was really cool. And I think we can definitely take a lot of inspiration from that group there. The next stakeholder is governments, as we were mentioning, providing regulation and laws which enforce people to develop AI in that way and make those decisions and not just kind of relying on their goodwill. corporations, the companies also building these AIs within the kind of private sector as well, and also society. So this is the big one that we wanted to just quickly focus on. So researchers, as we touched on, advocacy groups, and members of the public who are using these systems, who are the customers of these big companies. There's a lot of responsibility on us now as well. As you know, we know that these companies have to follow the money in some ways, so we can vote with our feet in that sense. So did you have a quick piece to say on kind of public engagement and how we build and develop that?
Yeah, I think it's really important that the general public do understand just how big their part is to play in all this story. I mean, it's important to remember that these companies, they're getting loads of investment. They're not really making a lot of profit directly from these AI systems themselves. So they actually really want to learn from society how they're interacting. I mean, I remember actually Sam Altman said in an interview something like he was surprised with like how much people loved the release of ChatGPT. Like they didn't expect it to be that popular.
Right.
I think that's a really important lesson actually in terms of, well, we actually can think how we want to use this technology. And if that kind of lends itself towards like more ethical principles and people aren't using it for certain reasons, these companies actually do want to cater to you for profit. I mean, they want you to interact with them.
We do have a lot of power, yeah.
And I think core to this is AI literacy, and really understanding that AI literacy is, of course, it's how to use technology, how to like make use of it, how to avoid its risks. But a really big part of AI literacy is also being advocate for shaping this future integration. And we really hope that in this episode we've given enough of a background of the principles and kind of a bit of the technical problems and like what the current landscape of the regulation looks like.
Yep.
And that ethics shouldn't just be like top down, and that as an individual we can create some change.
Yes,
so
that's a really good point.
Yeah, we're really lucky actually. Huw obviously is co-organising Data Ethics Club, where they have loads of ethical discussions. So he's actually given us some tips on just how to have these conversations with your friends and hopefully the wider society.
Yeah, I think ethics generally can be a really loaded discussion, because I think if two people disagree, then there's kind of an implication that at least one of them thinks the other one's being unethical. And I remember I had a discussion with someone I studied at university with my undergrad with, and I mentioned I was involved in data ethics, and their response was like, "Oh, ethics is a waste of time. Like, you know, that's like they just get in the way and slow down progress and stuff like that." So I think being confrontational is not the right way to do it. You have to find a line, because you can't just sort of concede to everything that everyone says. But I think giving the sort of space to everyone to say how they're feeling about something.
Yep.
You know, we're not writing ethics frameworks in these discussions. We're just having a chat about, okay, well, this is the way someone's done some research. How does that make you feel? Do you think you'd feel differently if there was something different about, like if you came from a different background, and bringing people with different backgrounds, whether those are demographic or professional backgrounds together, and those experiences that people have can really lend itself to kind of mixing, because you start thinking like, oh, well, I wouldn't have thought of that way, but I've not been affected by data in the same way as someone else.
Yeah, those are some really nice points from Huw, and I think maybe it's just myself, but I think there's often a stigma and kind of some preconceptions around what ethical discussions mean and what it means for kind of innovation, and that it can be stifling. So I think starting by changing that narrative and realizing that they're very important discussions to have, so that we do actually maximize the benefit of the technology and everyone kind of reaps the rewards in the long run, is an important first step. So changing the kind of framing of that is super important. Cool. Well, just to finally wrap up then, I think just our take-home point for the listener there, because that was a lot of information, but a very, very important conversation, as Riku and I both kind of said at the start. But I think the main point here is that currently these very, very big AI tools are being developed by businesses that are highly concentrated in just a few countries and a very small number of firms, and they hold a lot of power in how these tools are being developed and how they're benefiting society. You know, ChatGPT has, I think the latest numbers, 800 million weekly users. So that is a lot of the world that is being impacted by these systems, and a very small number of people developing them. And they're usually developed in very kind of male-dominated teams as well. That's just one example of the kind of things that we need to address with how these systems and these technologies are being developed. And without cultural diversity that characterizes our world and all of those 800 million people, yeah, it's hard to see how we're going to develop systems that kind of widely benefit society. So we all need to speak up. We all have our part to play, and you can make an impact. I think that's the other really key point we wanted to make in this. One thing you can do just very practically and quickly today, if you're here in the UK, is write to your local MP. So I did this recently, actually, when I'd been looking at this open letter about banning superintelligence, because as we will get onto in a future episode, we plan to do a whole episode on superintelligence. That is a very scary thing that I feel very passionate about. So there is a company called Control AI, which is specifically focused on legislation and educating people about policy and governance around AI. You can go to controlai.com, and they have a tool on there that says that you can make your voice heard on AI safety regulation, and it helps you draft a letter to your MP, finds your local MP for you, and then they're obliged to go to government if there are enough people to speak on your behalf. So yeah, I think vote with your feet, raise your voice, and choose ethically which kind of chatbots, websites and apps you use, because that does shape this whole landscape and will shape the future of society with how widespread AI is now becoming. So
wow. So thank you all so much for listening. Please do get in touch with us. Contact at artificiallyrough.com. And again, a huge thank you to our Patreons. We're super duper grateful. And anyone else that wants to join the club, there is some more exclusive content.
Yeah, got some cool episodes coming your way.
Recently, or will we actually, it should come out soon actually, is our predictions for AI coming forward. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.